Welcome back to Normal But Not. I'm Krystal Centinello, and this is Oliver, Mr. Buttons if you're nasty. If you're watching on video, you can see this. If you're not watching on video, why not? Join me. I am your trauma-informed boundaries and empowerment coach and a recovering people pleaser, and I'm here to help you reclaim your power, find your voice, and set boundaries without guilt. In this podcast, we are going to explore behaviors that felt normal, but actually aren't helpful today. In this particular episode, we are going to dive into a big question. Is it normal to feel uncomfortable around straightforward people? If you've ever felt unsettled by someone who clearly states what they want or sets boundaries effortlessly, you're not alone. This discomfort is common for people pleasers, but not normal. Sorry to tell you. But today we're going to explore why. We are going to unpack research from psychologists like Dr. Harriet Lerner, Dr. Gabor Maté, and others, share relatable examples, and give you actionable steps, as always, to navigate these feelings. Stick around to hear about the upcoming workshop. You still have time. There is 4 days until the workshop goes live. From trauma to triumph, setting boundaries that transform. From trauma to triumph, setting boundaries that transform in just 1 hour. You can also take my What Kind of People Pleaser Are You quiz. Stick around to the end of the episode to hear more. Why do straightforward people make us feel uncomfortable? Recently, I had a client who's doing so much work, doing a great job setting boundaries. She really uses that, I can't commit to this right now. And then we'll ask more questions to explore. Who brought this topic up about how other people who set boundaries effortlessly, she just doesn't necessarily like them. And I was like, ooh, this is a great topic to explore. What is it about them? Now, when I am one-on-one with a client, it is easier for me to ask questions and help unpack that because for some of us, there are personal reasons behind it. But I figured, you know what? Aside from where my clients are coming from, let's dig into the research behind why it causes us as people pleasers so much discomfort. As we've touched on before, as people pleasers, we often grew up in these environments where expressing needs or emotions just wasn't safe. Dr. Harriet Lerner in The Dance of Anger explains that people pleasers are conditioned to prioritize harmony over honesty. So in the last episode, in episode number 12, we talked about that people pleaser who leaps into action so that they are avoiding that conflict and trying to resolve it so that everyone else is comfortable, ignoring their own feelings. They're prioritizing that harmony over the honesty of their own feelings. When we as people pleasers encounter someone who is honest and they confidently state their needs, it can feel jarring. It disrupts this deeply ingrained belief that prioritizing others is the right way to be. Think about it. It doesn't align with everything we've done throughout our entire lives. So who is this person? Feels like a high conflict person, if you ask me. And we avoid conflict. We avoid high conflict. We're hyper vigilant, wondering, I don't know how to respond to someone's behavior like this. I only know how to smooth things over. Dr. Gabor Maté adds to this in his book, When the Body Says No. He notes that people pleasers often develop an actual fear of rejection tied to those unmet childhood needs. And we've talked about this fear of rejection, fear of being disliked, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict. But Dr. Gabor Maté talks about fear of rejection tied to unmet childhood needs. When we see someone who sets boundaries and we haven't been practicing them and we haven't been setting them, it reminds us of our inability to set our own boundaries. And it can trigger the discomfort of our unmet childhood need, and it can often trigger jealousy. I wouldn't want to be around somebody I'm jealous of. I wouldn't want to be around somebody that makes me feel less than. I mean, likely we grew up in a place where we already felt less than, right? Additionally, this discomfort stems from early family dynamics. In an enmeshed family system, if you want to know more about that, episode number 11 breaks it down even further, or authoritarian households, straightforwardness might have been punished or discouraged. There was one person who was allowed to be straightforward, and that wasn't you. For example, if you were a child and you spoke up, and you were probably met with criticism, shame, anger, you learned to associate directness with conflict. Going back to Dr. John Bowlby and his attachment theory, it supports this. It shows that children in these environments develop those anxious attachments, focusing on pleasing others to maintain safety. Are you okay? Can I get you something? How can I help you? They're not going to speak up and say, I don't like that, and then possibly make someone else feel bad. So when someone does that to you and speaks up and is straightforward, like, oh, you have something on your shirt, or I can't make it tonight, it feels risky and foreign. And what if someone gets upset? Especially if that straightforward person, it's not one-on-one and they're not just saying it to you, but they're saying it with other people around and in front of you. The tension automatically is created, and you're worried about how everyone else is going to be responding. That hypervigilance kicks in, and you are ready to jump into superhero action. For those of you who listened to earlier episodes or my Reclaim Your Pleasure podcast, you might have remembered me saying my mom was excellent at keeping the peace. I used to say, like, she would feed the alligator hoping that she was the last to get bit. She often would be like, don't rock the boat, honey. So I grew up in this household where that was the unspoken rule. I would see adults who were assertive and think like, how can they say that without worrying about upsetting somebody? It almost felt rebellious, and I was far from rebellious. I was square and goody two shoes and people pleaser extraordinaire, which is why I'm doing this podcast. But as a recovering people pleaser, I understand that this discomfort wasn't about them. It was about my own fear of being judged or disliked for being honest. Like, I was putting myself in their shoes. What would happen to me if I spoke up? How would someone respond to me? It wasn't how people were responding to them. I was definitely focused on myself. So why does all of this feel normal, but it's not? For people pleasers, being indirect feels normal because it's a survival strategy. And don't get me wrong, the survival strategy, as unhealthy as it is as an adult, it also has some perks, which if you head over to the Reclaim Your Pleasure podcast, you can check it out over there. But one of them is that it makes us really in tune to other people's emotions. It helps us to read people well. And in a way, we can get ahead in life if we use our powers for good. But it's normal, but not. The problem is we're actually suppressing our own needs, or we feel uneasy around somebody who unapologetically owns theirs. And even as people pleasers, as we start to set our boundaries and speak up for ourselves, we still find ways around it so that we're not totally making other people feel uncomfortable. Like, I'll give an example. I coach rowing as well as coach people. And when I see somebody's form who's a little bit off, somebody who hasn't been a people pleaser might walk over and be like, "You're going to hurt your back. Change your form." And I walk over and say, "How does your back feel?" I assess them first to see if it's a problem for them before I chime in. If it's a problem, I will make a correction. If it's not a problem for them, the first time I would say, "Okay," and I would walk away. But after that, if still they said it wasn't a problem, then I would still make a correction and say, "Just so you know, down the line, this might hurt your back. Here's the correction." Again, it can be used for good if done well, but it still can be uncomfortable for us because even though I've been setting boundaries for nearly a decade, I had 3 decades of being a people pleaser. So while that's great growth in perspective, it's only been like a quarter of my life. All right, one more example about why else this makes us feel uncomfortable. Dr. Susan Forward, in her book Toxic Parents, she also explains that this dynamic creates a different internal conflict where you admire the straightforward people, but you also resent them because their confidence highlights your own struggles. And so all of these things that I've talked about with my clients in the past, and you might have been guessing at the beginning, or I may have mentioned, they're not just postulation. They come with supported evidence from great psychologists and researchers. So how does this impact us in adulthood? All right, so as adults, this discomfort can manifest in subtle ways. For example, you might actually avoid these assertive people because you're labeling them in your mind as rude or selfish. But being assertive doesn't make you rude or selfish. You can say, "Oh, I'd rather have the aisle seat." If you say it, "Give me the aisle seat," that might be rude or selfish. But if you're like, "Oh, I prefer the aisle seat," that's assertive. And if you're labeling these people as rude or selfish, then you're likely to hesitate stating your own needs. I mean, you have a reason you need the aisle seat. Maybe you have a cast on your foot and you need to sit in the aisle seat, but you're afraid of speaking up. That makes you rude or selfish. You're afraid of sounding like a bitch. Maybe you go to a restaurant and they give you an undercooked steak and it's cold and you're afraid of speaking up because you don't want to come across as rude or selfish. And you also might feel uneasy at your work or in your business or social situations where you actually need to directly communicate what you need. And it is expected there, but you're still holding back because of this learned, conditioned pattern. There's this other pair of psychologists, Patricia Love and Stephen Stosny. They have this book. It's called How to Improve Your Marriage Without Talking About It. And like, what does that even have to do with what we're talking about here? But they note that people pleasers often misinterpret straightforwardness as criticism. It's not your fault, but it's your responsibility to make that change in your understanding. So you were conditioned to misunderstand this because you were so accustomed to prioritize everyone else's needs that when someone else is straightforward, it feels like criticism to you. Grab that note-taking device that I know is near you, that notepad, whatever it is. It's time for your actionable steps. I have quite a few this time, 6 actionable steps. Number 1, identify your trigger. So ask yourself, why does this person's straightforwardness bother me? It could be something they're actually doing, or it could be the person themselves. Maybe you actually just have beef with the person and not their straightforwardness. Or maybe it's the straightforwardness that's triggering you. Is it because you're jealous? Is it because you feel uncomfortable if you were to say the same thing? Are you afraid of something blowing up and it becoming bigger? Recognize whatever it is about their behavior and know that it's about them. It's actually not about you. Number 2, try reframing your thinking. Instead of labeling straightforward people as intimidating, see them as a model of healthy boundary setting. Give it another look. Do straightforward people get what they want and still have strong relationships? Number 3, just like pretty much everything else, take it in a small chunk. Practice small acts of directness. So what would that look like in real life? How about, I'd prefer Italian food tonight. It's kind of like finding your voice. You don't have to ask, well, what do you want? Well, just do whatever you want. You can just say, I'd prefer Italian food tonight, and stick to it. Don't say, is that okay with you? Just, that's what I want tonight. I'd rather have sushi. Or you could even go with, no, I really don't want burgers. If you don't have a preference for something, but you definitely don't want something, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't just eat sushi, even though you feel like raw fish is disgusting, because everyone else wants it and you're afraid of rocking the boat. Don't try to find something on the menu. Say, I would prefer something other than sushi. It's a small win, but it will help build your confidence. Number 4, challenge the bitch fear. Remind yourself, stating your needs doesn't make you difficult. I'm going to repeat that. I feel like many of you need to hear that again. Stating your needs doesn't make you difficult. It makes you clear. Use affirmations. If you've been doing the I am enough, you are enough affirmation, great, you're ready to move on. And if not, you can do more than one. It's okay to ask for what I need. It's okay to ask for what I need. It's okay for you to ask for what you need. I promise you. And by the way, if you're single and you're dating and you're having trouble finding, in your mind, having trouble finding somebody, I'll tell you, some of the most attractive qualities are somebody who knows what they want and isn't afraid to ask for it. Number 5, learn from the straightforward people. Instead of trying to push them away or run from them, which is most likely what's happening, observe how they communicate. What can you apply that you like and are currently comfortable with in your own life? And lastly, number 6, if the fear of setting boundaries or sounding like a bitch resonates with you, sign up for my Trauma to Triumph workshop. We will explore how to set boundaries in a way that feels empowering and aligned. Feeling uncomfortable around straightforward people might have felt normal growing up, but it's not. The good news, you can unlearn these patterns and step into your confidence. Take my What Kind of People Pleaser quiz are you by heading over to krystalsentinello.com/type. It is also linked in the show notes, and there you'll be able to learn about your habits. You can also follow me on Instagram for daily tips. Next week, we are going to learn more about an important topic. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, what felt normal then doesn't have to define your normal now. Have a great week.